Is the US in the midst of a constitutional crisis? It's the question weighing on the minds of some. The first 100 days of Trump's second term has seen the administration enact a series of legal maneuvers, which many say stretch the limits of the powers of the executive branch. Others say the moves are outright unconstitutional. From allegations that the administration is ignoring the Supreme Court to firing judges who stand in the way of the government's political priorities, critics say President Trump is attempting to consolidate power at all costs. James Messina reports.
It's a fundamental principle of US governance. The checks and balances structure is designed to prevent any one person from wielding too much power. But in the first 100 days of his second term as president, Donald Trump has largely succeeded in outplaying this system. He got into action on his very first day, signing, as he'd promised throughout his campaign, a large number of executive orders. These written directives instruct government to take specific actions, and in 100 days he signed well over 100 orders. Among his first was the blanket pardoning of 1,500 insurrectionists convicted for the attack on the Capitol. Some of his orders have been taken to the Supreme Court.
Birthright citizenship is about slavery.
Such as his directive to end birthright citizenship, which is the part of the Constitution that declares anybody born on US soil to be a citizen. Trump is seeking to ban automatic citizenship for children whose parents are in the country illegally, but his order was blocked by federal district courts in 3 states. And Trump has ignored certain rulings, including one from the country's highest court that ordered the government to help Kilmar Abrego Garcia return to the United States after he was erroneously expelled and sent to his home country of El Salvador. Another decision by a federal court forbid his administration from banning the Associated Press news agency from the White House, but the president has yet to act on this too. Donald Trump and congressional Republicans have also threatened to impeach judges going against his agenda, such as James Boasberg, who Trump labelled a radical left lunatic, after the judge ordered a temporary halt to the deportation of alleged Venezuelan gang members. Meanwhile, 2 judges have been arrested by federal authorities, accused of interfering with the administration's immigration agenda. And several investigations into Trump, started during the previous administration, have been halted. Career Justice Department lawyers have been fired without explanation. Dozens are fighting their dismissals, some of whom had worked on investigations into the attack on the Capitol. But he hasn't just gone after civil servants. Private law firms are also in his sights, with Trump's executive orders placing restrictions on 4 major law firms that have represented clients who've challenged his policies in court or represented people who've previously investigated him. Some companies have stepped into line by agreeing to provide hundreds of millions of dollars worth of free legal services to initiatives that Trump supports, this to avoid sanctions. The American Bar Association, which the White House labelled a, quote, snooty organisation, said that the Trump administration is attempting to tip the scales of justice.
Well, let's take the pulse on the state of the rule of law in the US with Thomas Gift. He's the director of the Center on US Politics at UCL. Thomas, thanks so much for joining us on the program. I want to get stuck in with this with my first question. Is there a constitutional crisis going on in the US at the moment? Give us your view.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be with you. I don't think that there is a constitutional crisis going on, but that is not to say that there aren't challenges to democratic norms. I think it is fair to say that this is Trump's government and other public officials are just along for the ride. What we see is Congress and the courts, to an extent, forfeiting much of their authority to an imperial presidency. And what we're left with isn't a system of checks and balances between co-equal branches of the federal government. Instead, we only have checks and balances across political parties. And, importantly, Trump is doing everything he can to surround himself with a certain kind of person, which is a loyalist turned political executioner, somebody who is going to do his bidding. So should we be concerned about the state of democracy? Yes, there's certainly reason to be vigilant. At the same time, I am a little bit wary of sort of overstatements to that extent, framing this as a little bit too apocalyptic.
Well, let's talk about immigration, because it's an area where we've definitely seen some of that clashing between the executive branch and the courts play out the most, especially over cases like that of Kilma Abrego Garcia, who was deported by mistake by the administration. The administration is now, of course, ignoring that Supreme Court's order, calling for him to be brought back to the US. Talk to us about how Trump has been attacking the due process rights that citizens in the US have.
Well, the bedrock of Trump's policy is carrying out what he calls the largest deportation operation in history. But if you step back, his strategy is even broader. The Pentagon, for example, has announced the deployment of 1,500 active duty troops to the U.S.-Mexico border. Trump has stopped the processing of asylum seekers. He's also done away with a smartphone app that allowed migrants to schedule appointments with U.S. Border Control. All of this means that there's significantly more authority that's being given to immigrations and customs enforcement, which is also known as ICE. You know, ICE has certain rules and regulations under which they are kind of carrying out some of these deportations. And I do think that it's worrying. I mean, one of the cases that you just mentioned, that individuals are not getting due process, that they're basically just being sent back to their country and they're not being treated as they should. Everybody is entitled to due process of the law in the United States. That's true of U.S. citizens, and it's true of non-U.S. citizens. So to the extent that the administration is sort of not taking that seriously or not doing what the court says, yes, obviously that's a really big problem.
Well, I do want to get more of your view on this erosion of the right to due process. Some legal scholars are going as far as saying that Trump's attacks not only leave the undocumented in danger, but also US citizens, as you alluded to there. Give us your view on what some of the lasting effects will be of these, these series of attacks on the right to due process.
Due process is just so fundamental to American law and to American society. So whether he's attacking it in the context of immigration or some other context, that is really problematic because it is so fundamental to being an American and to living in a society with laws and regulations where individuals kind of follow those rules. So I think that it is absolutely problematic to the extent that he's essentially taking aim at specific justices, specific members of the court. That's a real serious problem.
Well, Thomas, what would you say to the people that are of this school of thought that say, look, the numbers of illegal migrants crossing the southern border is down to record low levels? This can be linked to the fact that Trump has had such a hardline approach to immigration and to the right to due process. I'm going to be devil's advocate here. What would you say to those people that are of that school of thought that, look, this is working?
Well, I think they have a point to an extent. And if you compare this to under the Biden administration, where huge numbers of immigrants were coming into the country, I think Trump has done a lot to tamp that down. Politically, immigration has certainly been a plus for Donald Trump's approvals, even though his approval numbers kind of in the doldrums at the moment. The one issue in which he is polling well is on immigration. And I think the majority of voters, according to polls, think that the immigration system is headed on the right track. But two things can be true at once. That you can respect the rights and privileges of both American citizens and non-American citizens when it comes to immigration, and you can also be tough on the border, right? It's possible to do that. I think Joe Biden did fail at that. It was a big reason why Donald Trump ended up being elected. But these are not mutually exclusive aims.
Well, I do want to focus on the case of a Wisconsin judge, Hannah Dugan. She was suspended after she was accused of helping an undocumented immigrant evade arrest by ICE. Is her case evidence of how Trump is trying to punish judges that stand in his way?
That's a very unique situation. Essentially, the county judge essentially allowed somebody who was standing for some other charge to be let out the back door. So I think in that instance, the judge kind of did overstep her authority, and I think that it was problematic. But again, is the appropriate response to that, arresting that judge who has, by all accounts, been a longstanding and upstanding member of the community. So it's certainly evidence of Trump trying to take a hard line on immigration. I'm sure this polls well with a certain fraction of the MAGA base. But you have to be concerned certainly about overstepping. If he's willing to do that, or the administration is willing to do that, what is the administration also willing to do on this front?
We've also seen mass firings at the Department of Justice in the first few months of Trump's second term. The administration has gone after senior career officials as well as prosecutors investigating Trump and the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Talk to us about the impact of the administration's campaign in the Department of Justice and these mass firings.
Yeah, I mean, the Department of Justice is supposed to be an independent agency, right? It's within the executive branch, but the norm has always been that it operates autonomously, and that the attorney general and all of the lawyers who are under him or her are basically operating on, are people following the law? They're not following the law. If they're not, we're going to prosecute them. You know, so Trump is really concerned about installing loyalists kind of at every level of government. It's part of what he refers to as eliminating the deep state. And I think the Justice Department was top among that priority list simply because this is the entity that went after him quite vociferously under the Biden administration. But to the extent that he's politicizing the Department of Justice, to the extent that he is trying to put individuals as political appointees in positions that have traditionally been career civil servant roles, I think also that is very problematic.
Well, have to see what the next few days hold, or not few days, thousands of days, because we still have quite a while to go now in this term. Thomas, thank you so much for joining us on the program. It was great to get your insight today.
Thank you.